Welcome to the Back to Business webinar and Happy New Year. We have some challenges ahead, but I'm sure most of us are looking forward to the new year with some optimism. I'm Mike Boyle, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Kawasaki in Lincoln. This is my first official act as the 2021 Chair of Nebraska Chamber Board of Directors. The mission of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry is to promote and protect Nebraska's free enterprise system by ensuring a competitive business and climate, economic growth, and greater prosperity for all Nebraskans. Please advance the slides. Next one. Next one. 2020 taught us a lot about what it means to be mission-driven at the Nebraska Chamber, and we start 2021 recognizing the need to do two critical things at once. The first is keep people safe by following health guidelines, and also keep business open and by making data-based decisions and consulting with Nebraska's globally recognized medical experts. The second is to begin to take bold steps to plan for Nebraska's economic recovery and competitiveness in a post-pandemic world. The Nebraska Chamber Board is committed to the types of discussions, processes, and programs necessary to move us forward on these fronts, and that process begins today. I'd like to introduce Brian Sloan, President of the Nebraska Chamber. Brian is a great communicator. He seems to know everybody in Nebraska and continue to meet with local leaders across the state during the pandemic. From these conversations, Brian and the Nebraska Chamber have developed a plan for Nebraska's growth in 2021 and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Sloan.
Hey, Mike, thanks. And thanks for kicking off the new year as chair, and thanks for accepting the role as our chair. We've got lots of important work to be done in 21, and I'm more than pleased that you're going to be at the stern and leading in the chamber this year. I want to thank also our members across the state, the corporate citizens and Main Street businesses who fuel our economy and our jobs and our communities are absolutely essential every day in creating what is the best quality of life in the country. All of us share a similar vision of post-pandemic recovery. We want to maintain Nebraska's quality of life. We want to grow our workforce. We want to stay competitive in the global marketplace. And we want to provide a sufficient economic base for our communities and government to provide necessary services. All of these are challenged right now coming out of the post-pandemic environment. And given these challenges and opportunities, the Nebraska Chamber and its members will have to work hard to support even bolder public policy objectives and to achieve a recovery coming out of the pandemic. And to really achieve what is a rare opportunity for Nebraska's economy to grow and become even more competitive nationally and globally. So if we'll move to the next slide, I want to talk about this moment that matters for Nebraska a little bit. If we think about Nebraska before the pandemic, and this pandemic has lasted longer and has been deeper than I think we all expected to begin with. But coming into the pandemic early last year, a year ago, if you'd ask us what the #1 challenges are, we would have said it's our aging population growth and its effect on workforce, that we were projected and are actually still projected to have fewer young people over the next 10 years. It's a ripple from the baby boom from now until 2030. And that population and population growth was indeed, and its workforce effects, the #1 issue for businesses and really our economic future in the state. Beyond that, our productivity in several sectors was lagging because we were not as technology enabled as other states were. We weren't attracting the same level of innovation and technology into our industries, but we also had the most opportunity. And some of our infrastructure is aged and needs to be updated. Clearly, some of that is broadband and some of that is highways as examples. Absent, though, the population growth necessary to meet our economic needs and our workforce needs, that also is going to have an effect on our ability to fund public service and education demands and on our tax burdens. And we'd already seen the beginnings of that as our tax burdens are increasingly becoming uncompetitive as we look at other states, and is a factor in the out-migration of people from our state who are tax sensitive. But at the same time, we've got lots of opportunities in Nebraska, and probably never have had, at least in my lifetime, these kind of opportunities to take our natural advantages and grow the state, both in terms of population and our economy. Our quality of life continues to be unmatched in Nebraska. Our central location as a logistics hub has all sorts of opportunities as we bring supply chain back to the United States. Our untapped innovation and technology potential means that we have the ability to grow our productivity as a workforce longer and faster than any other state. And our key sectors of agriculture, manufacturing, and finance, for example, are a strong backbone to our economy and have been rather resilient actually during this pandemic environment, and have really put us in a place that coming out of the pandemic, we have the strength in our economy to succeed and take on big initiatives. We know that it's going to take, though, to take advantage of these opportunities, both a sense of urgency and the ability, even more importantly, to build a consensus in the state about what our economic future should be. So let me talk about an economic game plan, at least from Nebraska Chamber's view. So if you could move the slide, please. As we look to 2021, we intend as a chamber to be very transparent about where we see this economic game plan and where our members across the state see this economic game plan. It's absolutely essential that we grow population and economy to continue the quality of life in this state. About a year and a half ago, Blueprint Nebraska published a report, and we adopted that at the chamber as an economic plan. It was a grassroots plan that involved literally thousands of participants statewide, which made it unique, geographically dispersed across the state. We have taken another look at the Blueprint plan and have determined that coming out of the post-pandemic, it's as relevant as any and as relevant as ever in terms of where we need to go as a state. Those goals that were in that plan continue to be the issues and the goals that we need to have, only with a greater sense of urgency in 2021 and 2022, looking forward to this decade. We need to create additional jobs. We need to continue to be one of the top places to live in the country. And particularly in a post-pandemic world where the whole notion of work-life balance and the whole notion of how we work and where we live has changed, and remote workplaces now have become very attractive. Nebraska has to be one of the top attractor of 18 to 34-year-olds. This is going to be the basis of those states that succeed and those states that don't succeed in this new economy. We're already seeing it. You can see it in states like Illinois and New York and California, who are having out-migration of this very essential group. This is the time for Nebraska to capture the ability to attract 18 to 34-year-olds. To do that, we're also going to have to make investments in things like innovation and research. We're also going to have to continue to develop our communities in ways that make them even more attractive across the state to this particular sector. And so Blueprint Nebraska was focused very much on people, places, government, and sectors. And I think all of those will continue to be very important in this process. As a state, we need to be nimble in how we engage in this process. And we need to have a sense of urgency coming out of the pandemic to take advantage of the current opportunities Nebraska has. So if you could move to the next slide. I want to talk about this notion of the pandemic recovery and the urgency we have. Simply put, as we look past the pandemic, we've got two big issues that we've got to drive. And that's true whether you're in this industry or whether you're in the public sector, or whether you're in Western Nebraska or Eastern Nebraska. And those two issues are workforce development and economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. That's exactly what we need to be focused on at this point. For the Nebraska Chamber and others engaged in this effort, old ways of looking at things and old conflicts are going to have to take a back seat for a while. Workforce development and economic recovery are issues that are not partisan, they're not parochial, it's not urban versus rural. It's not a debate between the private and public sectors. We're all dependent upon Nebraska engaging and winning in these two areas. The importance of securing the state's economic future transcends all of our special interests. This is a moment in time that compels all of us to do something that is generational in ramifications, with statewide breadth and impact. And by developing consensus around key policy choices to keep Nebraska at the cutting edge as a competitor in the economy, we will set the blueprint for our way forward. But achieving the blueprint and the pandemic recovery vision is only possible if we act as one team. The state's public, private, political, and charitable leadership has to come together to make a recovery and growth agenda a reality in the state. As my good friend Tony Goins says, it's time we all wear the same jersey. And in our case, our jersey, whatever color it has for whatever school, it has a big N on the front. So beginning today and for the remainder of this 2-year legislative session, the Nebraska Chamber is going to ask even more of itself and our members as we stick to a very transparent agenda during this period. We're going to commit to aggressively leading, convening, partnering, researching, educating, and discussing, and most of all, listening and adjusting and compromising as necessary to build the partnerships and to do as much of the blueprint plan and our pandemic recovery plan as is possible in these two years. We need to move the ball across the goal line. This is our agenda, plain and simple. We're going to be recruiting from this group today and others to find key blockers and tacklers and receivers and special team members to truly make sure we get the ball across the goal on the things that matter to this state's future and matter to future generations of Nebraskans. So with that, let me turn over to Kristen Hasselbrook, the mic, in order to be a little bit more specific about what is in our agenda that we're going to be pursuing the next 2 years. Kristen?
Thanks so much, Brian. And welcome everyone. So what takes this analysis and really turns it into action? It's an economic and competitiveness agenda that has clear expectations, seeks and integrates feedback, and has a process for addressing each item. Before you is the Nebraska Chamber Back to Business Recovery Agenda, alongside the Blueprint Nebraska agenda. It's similar to our efforts through this summer when we established a relief and recovery effort for businesses. Each of these items build upon and expands from that effort. Each of the agenda items are parts of a whole. At the Nebraska Chamber, we know we must move forward on a multitude of these fronts, most likely on more than one at a time, to maximize Nebraska's potential. Each uniquely serves the greater good of our state, yet when accomplished as parts of a whole, can provide the game-changing workforce development and economic recovery needed for Nebraska to flourish in this moment that matters. You'll begin to see many of these agenda items in legislation that comes before the Nebraska legislature, even in 2021. However, our work does not stop there. Several will require federal legislative action, other regulatory mechanisms, and most just plain old pull up a seat at the table and get things done through public and private channels. Work has already begun with our partners to better understand and navigate the regulatory barriers and burdens to accessing existing workforce training resources. Our goal is to raise awareness and streamline access to existing pools and newly opened pipelines to better serve Nebraska businesses and employees. In concert with the Nebraska Manufacturing Alliance and Blueprint Nebraska, we are working to unify state branding and marketing, focus on attracting the redomestication of supply chains, and building a business-to-business platform to facilitate communication and networking among Nebraska manufacturers. Legislatively, we continue to work on federal and state efforts to provide temporary and targeted legal liability protections related to COVID. This year in the Nebraska legislature, we will be working with senators to make improvements to the child care subsidy, expand support for entrepreneurs and startups, support some of the industries that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, and continue the conversation on making Nebraska's tax code competitive in this post-pandemic world. As we have always done, we will continue to seek and integrate feedback on this agenda, and we will serve our members as convener and facilitator to move each forward. With that, I think we can take a few questions if we have time.
Good morning.
Good morning, Holly.
We are asking some questions today about the possibility of reemergent of regulatory, kind of a more restrictive regulatory environment in Washington, D.C. Is there any thoughts about what we may be able to do at the state level in order to increase some of the business competitiveness here?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. It's still too early to tell exactly what the political ramifications are going to be from this election process, but let's take the question at its face, which is, let's assume that the federal government becomes much more engaged in regulatory supervision And in that environment, historically, the state chamber has taken a position that we certainly don't want any state regulations that are more restrictive than federal regulations that would restrict our economy more than other states, that we need to be competitive. We'll probably continue down that road, but yes, it does create opportunities. Where the regulations that are developed for industries and for segments of the country that really are not reflective of Nebraska, there's always an opportunity for Nebraska to be much more attractive to building those portions of the economy. And we've even seen it not only in the regulations themselves, but in terms of the customer service view of regulators. And so Nebraska has a very great tradition of public servants involved in our regulatory agencies being very responsive to our companies, which is not the tradition in a lot of other states, enforcing the regulations, but being very transparent in what they're doing. And I think in addition to regulatory advantages, I think if our state government continues to be very responsive and very transparent in terms of how we go about regulatory regimes and eliminating regulations that are unnecessary, it'll make us more competitive, no question.
Thank you. We have another question about the types of infrastructure enhancement needed to make some of the chamber priorities a reality.
Let me throw out 3 buckets and then if Mike and Kristen have anything they want to add to that. Three obvious areas, and there's more, but number one is rural broadband. We've now entered a world where what the pandemic has done is just accelerate in a very high rate changes that were already happening. But the economy is moving digital very, very quickly at this point. And you combine that with now many, many more in a remote workforce, and I think that's probably here to stay. There's real opportunity for our rural communities to attract that 18 to 34-year-old population, and particularly remote workforce that may be working for global companies, but they live in Wahoo or they live in Chadron. To do that and to accomplish that, rural broadband infrastructure now becomes even more important than it was prior to the pandemic. If you talk to people, you saw it in our slides, if you talk to people in Columbus and Norfolk, the first words out of their mouth was, when are you going to finish these highways? And so that's a form of infrastructure that's important. But I think even more important as well is what our communities look like and how attractive they are to that 18 and 34-year-old group. There's some exciting things happening. I'll just point out a couple, but there's communities all over the state. Norfolk has got some really, really incredible plans on the table of transforming downtown Norfolk into something that's going to be very robust and attractive to this very generation of population we need to attract. Keep your eyes on places like North Platte and Hastings that also have some really exciting things going on. And I think what you're going to see is really a revitalization of rural communities across our state, but it's going to take some investments in downtowns to make that happen.
Speaking of investment, what types of action need to be taken in order to encourage additional investment in innovation and R&D?
So I think that this is where you get to the public-private side, and I'd be interested in Mike's views on this as well. It's being one of our large manufacturers in the state, where you see great research and development partnerships, and Silicon Valley actually developed out of that. Certainly the Triangle in North Carolina developed out of that, is where you get the business community and education working together, and you create tax structures and you have a tax environment that attracts innovative companies and innovators to take that research and turn that into practical applications. What I would hope we would do here would be the same thing, is we would modernize our tax code really to attract research and development to Nebraska in all of our key industries: agriculture, manufacturing, finance, engineering, construction, you name it. That we would create better partnerships with education. So just an example, the University of Nebraska, where Ted Carter's truly leading that organization into much more of a research-based organization, a much bigger and broader-based research organization, and then combine that with our private sectors, example, the manufacturers, to really make Nebraska center of example, our second largest industry manufacturing, a leader in manufacturing technology, not only in the country, but globally. But that means creating a new relationship between education and our basic industries. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for us, there are two types of R&D that we as a manufacturer are really interested in, and I think other manufacturers probably also follow in the same path. The first is we have product development that needs to be done right now, and improvements to be made on an ongoing basis. And then we also have R&D for the next generation of product. And how do we align that with our educational institutions when sometimes they are concerned about more, when we say transformative R&D, and further down the road where working together to solve current problems and short-term problems as well as long-term problems are really, really necessary.
Thank you. I know a number of our panelists have thoughts on this as well. Considering that perception is reality and marketing drives perception, what does the state have planned from a marketing perspective to promote Nebraska opportunities to outsiders?
Yeah, I think this is just about ready to take off. I think all of us are painfully aware that we've not had sort of a singular brand for Nebraska for forever. And so when you ask people globally and across the country what their view of Nebraska is, you get, not surprisingly, all sorts of different views. We are about ready to kick off a single branding initiative within the state, which will be a public-private endeavor. If we can get the state government, our public institutions, our private institutions, businesses, to start really branding our communications, both our formal communications and our social media communications, in a way that portrays Nebraska for what it is, which is this incredible quality of life and incredible opportunity for people not only to make a life, but get involved in their communities in a way that's not possible in a lot of other places, particularly urban places. If we can do that and we can start marketing and selling that and connecting in our social media and our digital world as well with that same branding, and then turn that into specific asks for people to come back or people to come to Nebraska. What we know about that process is once you get somebody to Nebraska, they never want to leave. It's just getting them here and having the marketing program around that. So I think 2021 will be that year where you see that put together, where you'll see government, charitable, public, private sectors getting together around a single branding initiative. And that really stems because the workforce issue now has become so significant to the state. And also the growth of the economy is very important to being able to continue to fund basic educational and public services in this state. I mean, we are all pretty much aligned at this point around the need to grow people and economy in this state.
Thank you. We have a question about how the business community can have an impact in some of the more traditional economic development programs, whether they have to be run federally or what impact DED or its stakeholders, business community can have in that type of policy making.
I think what I'm expecting to see from the federal government, regardless of the political changes, but I'm expecting the federal government post-pandemic to continue to make some very large investments in infrastructure. So I would hope the federal government would be involved in helping fund rural broadband. I would hope that it would take aggressive action on finishing highways and some of those sorts of things. At the same time, there's no question that the state is going to have to control its own destiny in a lot of the other infrastructure efforts and also be supportive of those large ones. and certainly in terms of community redevelopment. That tends to be done best where there's both public and private participation in that process. And you see that in the community development. And again, I'll point to Norfolk right now and what's going on there. You see a very active public, private, and charitable partnerships being formed to make that happen. And you see it, you know, certainly in developments in Omaha and Lincoln over the last couple of decades. That model works in Nebraska, and then my favorite little community of Pender, which I'd be remiss not to mention. When you get public-private participation and everybody investing in the same direction, communities thrive.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. How can these priorities we're discussing today help the businesses struggling through the pandemic?
Well, this is probably a good one for Mike to finish with after I tee it up a little bit. Going into the pandemic, the number one challenge for our state in terms of our economic vitality and how you approached it, regardless of where you come from, was this population and workforce issue. We had 30 to 50,000 jobs at any given time open because we couldn't fill them. We didn't have people. Coming out of the pandemic, it may be a little smaller than that, but not much. If you went to our manufacturers today and ask them what their number one issue is during the pandemic, once we get hopefully some legal liability legislation, which was in our agenda, they would tell you it's still workforce and it's still population and workforce and being able to find the workers to drive our economy. It's our biggest limiter. And so coming out of the pandemic, what I would say is what's happened is those are still the drivers for us, but there is really a need for a sense of urgency in this state to develop and execute and implement the keys to attracting this workforce and attracting this population, retaining the young people that we have in this state. And that means we're going to have to reform our tax code and modernize our decades-old tax system. We're not going to be able to attract young people at 6.84% income tax rates and some of the highest property tax rates in the country. We're going to have to build our communities in a way, and that's going to be private investment and public investment to make that work. We're going to have to deal with broadband. And so what you saw when Kristen slides on both Blueprint, which was a grassroots effort, and our chamber recovery plan, is we want to be very, very transparent. And that's the whole goal of those slides, is we want to be very transparent about what we see those initiatives being, and we need to partner with education. We need to partner with ag. We need to partner with government. We need to partner with charitable organizations to really start making progress as a state on these, because it will dictate for the next decade how successful we are in doing that. And so, Mike, I'll tee it up with that. Let's get, that's my 10,000 foot level. Let's get down to somebody who really runs a manufacturing shop. Where do you come out on this coming out of the pandemic? What's really important for not only your company, but for your people, all those people that work for you, to thrive?
Yeah, speaking from our perspective, first and foremost, having some legislation that protects employers for the COVID potential litigation and lawsuits is really important. In our particular case, it's impossible for us to socially distance our people, so we're somewhat open to that area. And then also, as you mentioned, workforce is an issue for everybody. We are included in that. And when you talk about quarantining and having people off work, for manufacturing, we need our people at work to build product. Through data-based decisions to reduce the absenteeism, we have to kind of modify what we do compared to local health authorities and the CDC to get people back into work. So that protection is really necessary. And then workforce, for us, everything starts with marketing our product for Nebraska and for our businesses. This is a great opportunity that we have here. Nebraska has come out pretty good as far as how we're doing from the pandemic and some of the decisions our leadership has made. And we need to start marketing Nebraska as a place to be and a place to grow. And all of us on this webinar really need to help out with that. It's really important that we work together. We have an opportunity here to move our state forward, and I think the information that you provided on this webinar is right on, spot on, as far as our key initiatives. So going forward, I think that's what we need to work together on.
And Holly, I think I would say this too. I think we sort of just right where Mike started with this. We're now starting January 21, have to do two things at once. COVID is still incredibly impactful to our business community and the people that work for us. And we have to do everything we can do to keep people safe in this state. So we've still got to follow the COVID guidelines. We do need to support the vaccine implementation. We need to keep people safe. And so none of this agenda in any way detracts from that priority, which is to keep people safe. At the same time, we need to start taking action now from a public policy standpoint to build for this post-pandemic recovery so people have good jobs and good opportunities coming out of this. And Nebraska is competitive because it is a brand new world in which Nebraska really can thrive, in a world where people can work and live anywhere they want to. But that process has to start now, because 2 years from now, there will be states that will have done this, and they will be successful, and they will be attracting the population, the technology companies, and the growth, both urban and rural. And then there will be states that are just getting around to it, and they'll be too late.
That is our time for today. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our members for joining us, members of the media. As always, we're available for questions following the briefing. Have a great day.